Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Hi.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me is Armin Navabi. Armin Navabi, how are you? How's it
Bored
going?
with your long intro. Let's move on.
Okay.
I'm good.
Armin Navabi was born in, okay, we're going to start with, and also joining us is a very respected member of the atheist YouTube community, you know, the elegant and the graceful Abdullah Samir. Abdullah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's good to have you again. And so we're going to get into a lot of heated topics. First of all, Abdullah, you gave yourself that haircut yourself because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. That's impressive.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. How did you do that?
Yeah. It wasn't actually that hard. You need a pair of clippers and you need a mirror for the back. So I didn't do the back actually. I'm gonna need help from my wife on that. But for the top part, it was honestly not that hard. It's you just watch a couple of videos and you'll get the hang of it. I think it's scarier. The idea of doing it was terrifying. I was terrified of cutting my own hair, but it was okay. Like it went fine. And the fact that most of us don't have to ever go out, it's kind of reassuring. Like no one's gonna see it, you know. So except for people like us, unfortunately.
Now here's the thing. Here's another reason why I mentioned this is because for those of you who are hearing this and you can't wait to see what Abdullah's haircut looks like, this is why you need to become a patron. Because what you're hearing right now, right, is just the audio.
Yeah, the video is for patrons only.
If you're a patron, you can watch this entire conversation.
You're missing out.
And then when you hear noise like this, you know that that's not an explosion, right? It's just a can of Diet Coke. So to become a patron, you can actually go to secularjihadist.com or patreon.com/sjme. You know, become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You can set your maximum limit, and it's absolutely amazing. And it's fun because you get to interact with everybody, you get to talk to the guests, you get to ask them questions and so on live as it happens, and you can watch all of the videos. And we've had some pretty amazing guests on throughout the lifetime of this. Anyway, so now the topic at hand. Today we're going to solve a huge problem, and the problem is, what is the one true Islam? And we're going to, by the end of this episode, we will have that problem solved. We will have that question answered without any ambiguity, because Abdullah Samir is here. He's going to help us do that. So here's the thing. Every devout practicing Muslim believes that the Islam they practice is the true faith. Yet there are countless versions of the religion practiced among its 1.7 billion adherents around the world. It's 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. They all think that they're practicing the true Islam. But does the one true Islam exist? And if it does, who is really practicing it? And if we do identify somebody who's practicing it, does that mean everybody else is wrong? Also, you know, what does Muslim mean? Like, we know that Islam is, you know, one that's codified in the Quran, and there's some sort of concrete characteristics to it. But Muslim is very different. Muslims are people. They're very diverse. They're very, so there's a lot of variation among them. What is it? Is it strictly somebody who believes in Islam, or simply someone born to Muslim parents? Right, so Abdullah Samir, to introduce him, he's been on 2 previous episodes. I'd really recommend that you watch the first one, because that really he'll tell you about his life story, which is it's really, really interesting. Abdullah preached Islam for 15 years.
We had Abdullah before, and he talked about his life story. So
yeah, he did, but that's why I'm just doing a quick review of it. He preached Islam for 15 years, and he founded popular Islamic websites like Light Upon Light before he gave it all up. In 2016, became an atheist in a coming out YouTube video that has like over 1 million views now. I can't remember how many there are now. So anyway, he's a great person to talk to because he's been on both sides of the fence. So Abdullah,
Yes.
tell
So
us.
just two small things. One, I actually left Islam in 2015, not 2016, but I didn't create the YouTube channel until 2016. So between 2015 and 2016, I was doing the blog. So I do have the blog as well, and that's where I started. And then eventually, I decided that I need to come out on video as well.
Mm-hmm. What's your blog URL? Can you just say that?
It's just abdullahsamir.com. So yeah, I put all of my write-ups, my thoughts, and what was going through my mind, and what I think are the best arguments against Islam from my perspective, right on there.
Okay, so that's great. So now the question here is that we were doing a previous show, and we were talking about if there is a true Islam, if there's one Islam or not, and you were in the comment section, and you said no, there are many different kinds of Islam, and there's no one true Islam. So that triggered Armin, right? So now that he was admitted, and he went through a lot of it was a little tough for him, but now that he's recovered, he's going to come back, and he's, I think, ready to have this discussion with you. Just a content warning, a trigger warning for people for PTSD and all these other psychological issues that millennials by law have to have nowadays. So here we go.
So
is there one true Islam or not?
I think just to kind of to start off, we should talk about something I think that's kind of interesting that's happening right now in the Muslim Twitter or the Muslim world, which is Daniel Hakikaju, which you had him on your channel.
Oh yeah,
has created an article criticizing Yaqeen Institute, and the shit has hit the fan. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I thought it was right. You know, it's relevant to what we're talking about, because from his perspective, Yaqeen is watering down, cotton candying Islam. They're like making excuses, and they're saying Aisha wasn't this age, and there's no such thing as slavery in Islam. So from his perspective, the true Islam perspective, these guys are like, you know, sacrificing the Islamic values for the sake of looking good and keeping people from leaving Islam.
Mm-hmm. Or modernizing in a way.
Yes.
Sort of the Protestantization of it. Yeah.
Just let me know when I could tackle. Okay, go on. No, keep. Abdullah,
no.
Okay, so Abdullah, can we actually get to the
Can't wait.
addressing the question of this episode? Abdullah, is there? What do you?
Yeah, but I'm not finished with my intro yet. That's the thing.
Oh my God! All right.
I'm kidding, Armin. It's okay.
Abdullah, okay, so no more stories, no more Twitter dramas. Let's get to the part of the show. What's the situation? What is your claim?
So,
Yeah.
So I think obviously for Muslims, for believers, they're going to, for the most part, say there is a true Islam, especially the Islam that I grew up in. So, for example, for Salafis, especially Sunnis in general, I mean, any sect really, any sect of any Islamic sect that anyone is in, they will always say that my version of Islam is the best version of Islam. Why is that? Because of so and so and so and so. But my perspective as an ex-believer is, how could I say that? And this was my perspective when I left Islam. My perspective was Salafism is the most correct, authentic, like original, true, closest to what Muhammad said and did. What he said and did, this is what Islam is. And Ismailism, for example, which is what I was born in, but I converted out of, that's just fake Islam. That's just nonsense. And that was my perspective. But now, after studying it and thinking about it a little bit more, I can't really, on good faith, say that one of them is actually more Islamic than the other. Like, who is to say Ismailism is not better or more authentic than Salafism? What do you think about that?
I think the problem is with your definition of Islam makes it seem like either one of these is Islam and the other ones aren't. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you consider all of them Islam, then there is one true Islam. And the one true Islam is not referring to the differences between all of these. The one true Islam is referring to what they all have in common, right? So, for example, if you say there's such a thing as mammals, You can't be like, no, there's no such thing as mammals. Look, we have horses, we have cats, we have dogs. Like, yeah, but mammals is referring to what they all have in common. Mammal is not referring to what the differences between them. Mammal is referring to what they all share, right? So you can't be like, oh, look at all these different Islams. There's no one true Islam. Yeah, because Islam is only referring to the belief in Allah as God, Muhammad as his prophet, and the Quran as the direct word of God. And they all share that. I'm being very inclusive to Ahmadis as well. I didn't say Muhammad as his last prophet, right? I said Muhammad as his prophet, okay? And the thing is that you could be like, well, I found this other fringe group that maybe doesn't fit your definition. The thing is that Islam has to mean something, okay? Yeah. If it doesn't mean anything, then it's not even a word. It doesn't. It has no use, okay?
Yeah,
it has no use. If it's supposed to mean something, then the definition. Some people could have different definitions, but what's the most useful definition, right? So you could come up with different definitions, but the most useful definition would be something that they all share. And once you come up with a definition, because we need a definition for Islam, or else communication is going to become very complicated, and we don't. So, how can we talk about something if we don't even have a definition for it? Right?
But what's common to all of them would be a subset of Islam. So, for example, like there's a lot more than just what is common to Islam. Because if you're saying the true Islam is what is common to all of them, then no Islamic group is Islamic, because they all contain a lot of other things on top of what is Islam. And by definition, if you're saying Islam is what is common to all of them, you could also say all of them are Islam, because they all have these things in common.
That's what I'm saying. All of them are Islam.
So then there is no true Islam, because all of these various interpretations are all Islam.
Okay, but you have to understand.
So where's the true coming from? Why is one of these Islams more true than the other one?
I didn't say that. The Islam, the definition of the word that I'm using as Islam is not referring. It's not even covering those areas. It's kind of like being say like, oh, look, some Muslims like cats, but the other ones prefer dogs. So there's no one true Islam. Well, my definition of Islam doesn't cover that area. It's only there is a one true Islam, because the definition of Islam is covering only the three things that I mentioned to you. Okay, so there's like you can't say like there is no one true mammal, because cats and dogs are different. Well, but the word mammal is not referring. Mammal is not even covering that area. It's not even covering that. If it's not covering the differences between cats and dogs. It's talking about the similarities between them, right?
So is Ahmadiyya true Islam?
Yeah, they're all part of Islam. They're all true Islam.
They're all true Islam? So there's no true Islam then? They're all true Islam?
They're all true Islam, yeah. Because the definition of Islam is referring to...
So what I was trying to counter... So when you had that previous conversation, which was an AMA, you said Islam is inherently political and you cannot separate politics from Islam. I said no in the comments, and I said I disagree. Islam can be apolitical, and I gave some examples. I said to many Muslims, Islam is the private practice of the religion, and you jumped on that and said no, that cannot be the case. Islam is political by definition.
Yeah, and I give you an
Islam is not just one thing. Islam is not one.
Did you see what you just did? Well, Islam is one thing. Islam is one thing because it's if you focus on the things that it's supposed to define. Okay. Again, right? If you cannot be like, oh, there is such a thing as men. I could be like, no, there is no such a thing as men, because some men are short and some men are tall. Like, what the hell? That's not the area of that is covering. But here's the thing: the reason did you just see what you did? Like you said, I said Islam is inherently political, and you said some Muslims are not political. So you just switched from Islam to Muslims. Okay.
And the reason
let's focus on Islam first. Okay.
No, but there's a reason why I did that, because to me,
but
the religion is the expression of Muslims' interaction with the holy books. So when a Muslim is doing the things that they do, that is Islam. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, there'll be
That's a
some
circular
Islam that are
thing.
more fringe, and there'll be some that are more mainstream. So obviously, the majority are Sunni Muslims, and the minority would be like Alavis and whatever, and Smileys are also a minority. But for all of them, their interaction, their Islam is how they bring it to life. Islam is not what is on the shelf. It is not the Quran and the Sunnah. It is the way that the scholars have interpreted it, and the way that the masses have believed in it, practiced it, and made it into the real world.
Okay, Abdullah,
hold on.
I disagree with you there, huh?
Okay, but he said I didn't finish my my
point.
political before. Now he said Islam and Muslim.
I actually agreed with Abdullah until now. So, I'm sorry, Armin, but I disagree with him there.
Let me just say two things very fast because you guys didn't let me finish. First of all, the reason why it's political inherently is because because in my definition I said what Islam is the belief, not the people, the belief in Allah as God, Muhammad as his prophet, and the Quran as direct word of God, right? You're a Muslim if you believe that, even if you have never read the Quran and even if you have no freaking clue what's in the Quran, okay? So you're still a Muslim, and even if you don't practice it, even if you don't do anything that makes you look like a Muslim, if you believe that, you're a Muslim, okay? The thing is that even if you don't practice it as a Muslim and you don't know what's in the Quran itself contains commandments that makes it political, right? So as long as the Quran has anything to do with Islam, Islam is political, right? If you can separate Quran from Islam, then you have dealing with something else. I don't know what if you want to name that. Okay, hold on, but you could name that Islam as well.
Yeah.
But then you're just confusing everybody because you have dealing with a completely new monster and you're just naming it something. You're using the same word that we use to refer to something completely different, and you're like, oh, this is Islam too.
Okay,
like, well, you're creating a little confusing. But with regards to this whole thing that you said, whatever Muslims do and whatever they express, that's Islam. That's also a very useless definition of Islam because it's very circular, right? Because you're like, oh, whatever Muslims do, that's Islam. Okay, then who are the Muslims? Muslims are people that practice Islam. Okay, then what's Islam? Islam is what Muslims practice. Okay, what's Muslim? Well, Muslims are people who follow Islam. Like, you can't come up with a circular definition. You have to start at some point. You have to either start with Islam or start with Muslims. It's easier to start with Islam because you have a certain set of beliefs. It's a more useful definition to come up with what the beliefs are and then identify who are Muslims based on who believes in those things, rather than the other way around. Like, first you define who's Muslim. Well, if you do that, then what category are you gonna put?
Got it.
How are you going to define? How are you going to decide who's in and who's not? You can't do that using Islam. Anyway, go.
Okay. Abdullah, go, and then it's my turn.
No, Ali, you go first. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to. So I actually think that. Oh man. Okay. So the last part of it, I kind of agree with Armin there. Okay. So I think that there's if you're talking about Islam and you're talking about what everybody has in common, the one thing that all sects of Islam have in common is belief in Allah, belief in Muhammad as a prophet. Whatever the order is, and belief in the Quran as a word of God, right? So if there's two ways you can define it. Are you defining Islam as what's codified, the beliefs and the ideology that are codified in the holy book, or are you defining Islam by the actions of its adherents? To me, the definition of Islam, right, is what's codified in the holy book. And what the actions of Muslims and whatever they do is different. So, for instance, you have religious Jews, okay, who will eat pork. So loads of Jews eat pork. Actually, a lot of them do. I think probably most of them do. And they, I think, like it more than other people like. But anyway, that's a different thing. But so lots of Jewish people eat pork. Does that mean Judaism is okay with pork? No, it's not, because Jews, the way that they act is very different from what Judaism actually is. And Judaism has a definition. So Islam also has a definition. And Islam, the definition is what's codified in the Quran. Now,
no,
if I broaden, what I would do is I'd back off a little bit, where I disagree with Armin a little bit, is I'd open up the definition of who, when we talk about who is a Muslim, I would say I'd kind of take away the idea of the Quran being the word of God.
How is that Islam?
That's what I'm saying. It's I think it's moving in that direction. I think it's moving in that direction.
Okay, but it hasn't. Okay, so here's the thing. You could be like, the word door means.
Wait. Let Abdullah go first.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, go.
So okay,
I have to
so I think the problem with doing that is this definition of Islam based on the Quran. It's much more complicated than that, because the creeds of Islam, right? They came about in the hundreds of years after the Quran was put into a book. So, for example, like even how you interpret, Allah's hands. What is Allah's hands? What is Allah's throne? There was differences of opinion, right? For example, the Asharis would say that Allah's hands means his power and his dominion, whereas Salafis would say that Allah has actual hands. So even the Quran itself, you're talking, even when it comes to the beliefs of Muslims, it's not even the way that you interpret the words, even that is not agreed upon, right? And these things have changed over time, right? So it's gone through a process. When Muslims interacted with Greek philosophers, that's when the Mutaliza, the Ash'ari, all of these different ways of interpreting what is Allah, what is Allah's relationship to us, and that's just the Aqidah. When we talk about the actual fiqh, when it comes to fiqh, there's huge differences in the Quran itself, how it's taken, right? I'll give you an example. I thought this was on point. This is from Jonathan Brown's book, and Jonathan Brown is wanted to show how the variety and how differently two different Sunnis can interpret the Quran, right? Just the Quran alone. And Shafi, and I'm quoting from the book, Shafi and his followers also innovated a new interpretive method for deriving rules from scripture, known as negatively implied meaning, mafhum al-mukhalafa. It held that if the Quran or Hadith made a positive statement about a thing, then the negative held true for all else. For example, the Quran encourages those agreeing on a loan to set down the agreement in writing and to take two witnesses from among your men, or if there's not two men, then one man and two women. Okay? Now, listen to this. Because the Quran specifies women as possible witnesses in the case of financial matters, Shafi concluded that these were the only cases in which women could serve as witnesses in court. Okay? Based on this rule of negatively implied meaning. Abu Hanifa, on the other hand, did not accept negatively implied meaning. He allowed female witnesses in all areas of laws except for some cases of capital or severe corporal punishment. So there is such a big difference in how the scholars interacted with the Quran. And this is fiqh. With Aqidah, you have the Mutaliza who decided that reason alone could determine, reason came before the Quran and the Sunnah. So what happened is they would throw out any hadith, for example, Allah coming down from the lowest heaven. They're like, this makes no sense. We're just gonna throw it out. And the caliph, some of the caliphs, for example, Caliph, I think Abdul Mamun, was a Mutaliza. So the Islamic Empire was officially Mutaliza. So there's, even within Sunni Islam, we have like so much differences, right? You know what I'm saying? And
you mean Mutazila, right? Mutazila.
Yeah, Mutazila. Yeah. Okay, so can I?
Yeah, you can.
I wanted to ask Armin, where is the politics in the Quran? Where did you say that the Quran is?
What the hell are you talking about? You read the Quran.
I'm asking you to explain.
Okay.
Go ahead. Let's have this conversation.
No. Let's focus on. Okay, let me just.
You said it's inherently political, and I'm disagreeing. I'm saying it's not inherently political. It's potentially political based on how you interpret the Quran. Now, I forgot to make this disclaimer. I wanted to make a disclaimer right at the beginning of the video. I totally forgot. I'm going to sound like an Islamic apologist right now. So keep in mind, I'm not doing taqiyya. I'm not Muslim. I don't believe in Islam. I'm doing this from a perspective of a disbeliever. I just want to be clear.
Devil's advocate versus devil's advocate. I love this. I'm gonna get the popcorn.
Before I shut you both down, let me just make it clear to our audience why you guys are both interested in a more flexible definition of Islam. Is because you guys are.
Hey! I haven't said my view on this yet.
It's my turn, okay? Okay, let me just...
No, but you're misrepresenting me.
Okay, some people might want the definition of Islam to be more flexible because they're trying to leave room for some people to remain Muslim and yet be like not believe in something as horrific and horrible and barbaric and violent and disgusting and vile as Islam. Okay,
No,
but good luck with that. But hold on, like, so maybe not you guys, but that's what the main what I think is the main motivation is, right? But really quickly I'm going to go through these things because I don't know when it's going to be my turn again. So moving in that, Ali said, is we're moving in that direction to have a definition of Islam for it to not be associated with the Quran, which is such a bizarre claim in my experience.
Not associated. Not you interrupted me at the end of that, so I'm going to interrupt you to correct it. I said there is a demotion happening, and I think we're going to see it happen from divine literal word to divinely inspired word. Like
as long as Islam is connected to the Quran, it's problematic. Okay, and if the Quran, if you want to create a Quran-less Islam, you're dealing with a different monster. Okay, the thing is that if you want to call that new monster something Islam, then I have to come up with a new name for whatever I'm dealing with right now. Like it's kind of like trying to cure cancer. Like, oh my God, we have cancer. We have to deal with, like, how do we cure cancer? Like, I have a solution. Let's redefine cancer to be a less harmful disease. Or at some point, maybe if we move in this direction, cancer could just mean rainbows and butterfly. Like, okay, now you just redefine cancer, but we still have cancer to deal with. I don't know what the new name for that is, but whatever cancer used to be is still here. Okay, so you're just confusing people by redefining things. So
I don't think Islam is cancer, but even if you were to use that analogy, there's multiple types of cancers.
I agree.
Right? There's one type of cancer, so it's an umbrella term, right?
Yes, exactly. But
stage 4 testicular cancer can be cured even if it's stage 4. Testicular cancer might be more like Jainism, though. Lung cancer is more,
you guys are missing the point, and you're not letting me finish my point. Yes, exactly. We have multiple different kinds of cancer, but the definition of cancer is referring to one true thing. There are some things like AIDS is not cancer, and cancer is all forms of cancer are cancer. So we know that cancer is referring to something specific. So that's why AIDS is outside of it, and brain cancer is inside of it. So it's referring to something true and specific. Okay.
No, you're
not. I have to move on to the other thing. He's saying, the belief of Muslims in the Quran. So Abdullah is saying, well, so the definition I gave you, which is the most useful definition, and I think most Muslims would even agree with this, and it's very inclusive. It's a big umbrella term that covers as many people as possible. So belief in Allah and belief in Muhammad as his prophet and the Quran as the direct word of God. When I say that, you're like, oh, but the Quran could be interpreted in so many different ways. Yeah, that's why I didn't say the belief in the Quran and this specific interpretation. Okay, the definition of Islam was very inclusive. I said the definition, whatever you think the Quran says, or even if you political. Hold on, let me finish. Even not only if you have multiple interpretation, even if you have no interpretation, even if you don't know if you go out and claim, I think the Quran is the word of God. I'm like, okay, what's in the Quran? And you're like, I have zero clue. I have no idea. How do you interpret it? I can't even start interpreting it because I have never read the goddamn thing. Okay, I'm even including that as that belief as in Islam. And you're like, oh, there's multiple interpretations. Yeah. But I'm saying that as long as you believe in the Quran as the direct word of God, you're a Muslim, and that belief system is Islam. So you're saying, like, okay, so how could it be inherently political? Okay, so that's what I'm saying is that the most literal interpretation of the Quran gives you some really horrible conclusions. It's violent, it's barbaric, it's political. We could disagree on that. We'll get to that later, but because that's the most literal definition, I'm not saying that literal definition that's the only thing that defines Islam. Okay, but because Quran is tied mostly to those political interpretation, because that's the easiest interpretation to get to it. I'm not saying that interpretation is the only definition, is the only true Islam. Okay, but Islam is tied very directly to those interpretations, is because it's the easiest interpretations to get out of it. So it's linked to part of the Islam's definition is a book, right? That if you actually take it seriously, will make it political, right? So it is it contains a book in the definition. It contains a book that is absolutely political. Even if Muslims do not believe in that interpretation, even if Islam by definition doesn't mean that you have to believe in that interpretation, the book does contain violent, barbaric, and political interpretation. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, we get it. Samir, go, and then it's my turn.
Okay, so if you look at history, we look at Muslims, where in the Quran is the Caliphate, the rules for having an Islamic state, anything like that? Is that even in the Quran? Is that what? how is that part of the Quran? You're saying the Quran is political, the Quran's political.
Right.
Where is, you can only project political, like Quranists are not political. Quranists are not political at all. And if you look at, for example, Hamza Yusuf and the Sufi movement in general, they have made very wide sweeping statements. For example, Abdullah bin Bayah, the Sheikh of Hamza Yusuf, has said, we don't want a caliphate back. We don't want hudud laws to come back. We don't want apostasy laws to come back. We're not going to
what they're saying, what the Quran says.
But that's what, it's not in the Quran that the rules for, okay, I'll give you an example. Let me give you a more direct example. This example they use a lot too. The rules for chopping off the hand. What's the minimum that has to be stolen? What are the conditions? Where are those? They're not in the Quran. And when Omar, meaning the Caliph, the third Caliph, when he actually suspended the rule of chopping off the hands because of the famine, he did that because of the bigger implications and the interpretation.
How does that make it not political?
But
can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Ali. All right, so you're referring to a lot of stuff that is in the hadith, for example, that is not in the Quran. Okay.
Yep.
But the Quran does, even though I agree, like 90% or 99% of the rules in Islam come from the hadith and not from the Quran. Mm-hmm. The Quran does make it clear that maybe not clear, but
those rules have to be applied today. Right, like there's rules in Islam that are time bound, context bound. For example, even in the Hadith, there are rules that
I didn't even say anything.
I'm just saying in general, like in general, the rules in the Quran. You have to be interpreting the Quran, and you have to say that these rules are for all times, because the Quran itself doesn't say, for example, the conditions or the universality of these rules, whether they're applied in that specific time.
When the Quran says that this is the inheritance for men and this is the not inheritance for women. When the Quran says that women's testimony is half of men, this is not hadith. This is the Quran, right?
Yes.
When the Quran says, like, gives you rules about zina and like how to, I know I had another example just from top. When the Quran says that you have to take the unbelievers' land and blah blah blah, and this is how you have to wage war against them. You could, like, there's many ways that you could say, like, okay, I could come up with interpretations that this is for a specific time and a specific place, but
even if you say it's not specific time and place, you're still interpreting it. Either way, you're interpreting it, and it's going to be a human effort.
By the most. All of these rules that all of the laws. Okay, so the hadith has more laws and rules than the Quran. Fine. The Quran does have rules and laws that you have to execute, that you have to maintain. It does. Even though it's much less than the hadith, it does. And I don't know how you define a government, but if you have if you have an army that's supposed to wage war, if you have a governing authority that's supposed to maintain specific rules, you have a government. I don't know how if you tell people like this money goes to the prophet or whoever the authority is, you have a tax system. Maybe you don't want to call it tax. You have government, okay? Like whatever. So you could come up with gymnastic arguments for why this is not a government, or this is for specific. This is my interpretation. But the Quran, the most direct, literal interpretation of whatever the Quran says, requires an army, requires a government, requires an enforcement method.
Where does the Quran require an army and a government? Where does it say that? The Quran.
Hold on. Can I talk?
And Shia. How are you going to maintain so specific rules in society?
Hold on.
You're just going to.
I think, okay, so there's two things I have to say. First of all, about the interpretation thing. On that, Abdullah, I agree with you. The reason that I do think that there's different versions of Islam, I'm not as liberal with it. I'm not into the whole mammals thing. I think that it's more strict than that. I'm a little bit more narrow when it comes to it. Is that I actually do think that if the Quran is the word of God, if the Quran doesn't exist, there's no Islam. If the Quran exists, that's why you have Islam. So now, when you have Quran, there's many things in the Quran that are completely cryptic and don't mean anything that we know. Alif Lam Mim, right? What does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. Then there are other things that are very vague and sort of like Deepak Chopra-ish. Okay, so there's that stuff, and that's open to interpretation, and people can take that as they want, and that's where a lot of your sectarianism comes in. Then there is stuff in there that's very concrete and real, right? And that's actually very direct. So the way that people explain those things away is through, by bringing in naskh, by abrogation, and looking at saying the historical context doesn't apply anymore, like the Ahmadis do, and so on. So I agree there are different ways to interpret them. Interpreted, many of them are legitimate, and some of them are not as legitimate. Okay, so that allows for why there's a diversity of different interpretations of what Islam is. But when it comes to the political thing, Armin is right. Like, he's absolutely, look, here's the definition of political, right? And you look at you're using reward, punishment. You have terms of law and order. You have terms of tribal identification, or which can be nationalism, which can be anything. You have territorial claims, like in Judaism, you have territorial claims. In Islam, not so much, not so concretely. So you're right about that. It doesn't say anything about government or anything like that. But the moment you have heaven and hell, and you're using those two incentives to direct or to manipulate people into behaving a certain way, right? And you're using fear to do that, fear of retribution from an authority figure, that is political. Off the bat, that is what politics is. Okay, so even at you don't even have to go into armies, you don't have to go into governments or statesmanship or anything, even though, like Armin said, the Quran does have a lot of terms of law and order in it. But even if you go with just the idea of hell, day of judgment, qiyamah, God is going to see whether you did the right thing or not. There's going to be a punishment for this. There's going to be less of a punishment for this. There's going to be no punishment for this. There'll be a reward for this. The moment you get into that, and you are getting people to behave a certain way, to put their own internal, what they want to do aside, their own will aside, and get them to act according to how they want the masses to act, that's by definition what politics is. So and by the way, I actually do, and I know you're saying that you're trying to act like an apologist. I do agree with you on a lot of that. Like, I do think there are many different kinds of Islam based on the interpretations. I think Armin is also agreeing to that. But like,
with the political thing, I think like any religious book that tries to influence behavior, I don't call that politics. You call that politics? I mean, that's just like what I consider private. So when I'm talking
let's use the same standards. There's many different ways to look at the word politics. What makes you that? Is there one true? Okay, wait. Is there one true politics?
Let Abdullah finish his point.
What I mean by politics here is what I'm to differentiate between Islamism and like private practice of Islam, like people not being involved in any sort of like theocracy, basically, right? That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about. And by the way, there's some history. I have some evidence from history as well. But Armin, you want to say something?
No. Go on.
I just want to. No. I just want to. He's going to move to history. He just made his point. Well, I just want to use your. I just want to use your own strategy against you. What makes your? There's no true politics. What makes your definition of politics better than my definition of politics? There's many different ways people could define. There's what I see as politics is just as true as what you consider politics. And based on what I see, what I define as what is political, Islam is completely political.
But
that's not an issue to me. Whatever you want to call it, I'm just saying we need to come to a common understanding of that.
Exactly.
Discuss it.
Exactly.
No, in this case, I think it's clear what I mean is not like if you're going to say fasting is politics and praying 5 times a day is politics. That's not what I mean.
No, that's not what I mean.
That's not what we mean.
That's not what I mean. What I mean,
you said heaven and hell and praying 5, like anything that influences human behavior is politics. That's not
praying
what I'm talking about.
Look, there are people in the U.S., right, who have, they don't care. They're sitting here. It's a free country. They're praying 5 times a day. They're not necessarily doing it because they're going to go to hell if they don't. They're even doing the sunnahs, and they're doing the tarawih, the stuff that's not even needed, but they're doing the extra stuff because they want to get extra reward or because it makes them feel good. That's a personal thing. So I believe that I know many Muslims who actually just are secular Muslims. They practice it in private. They ignore all the political aspects of the Quran. They don't even care about heaven and hell. They have doubts about heaven and hell. But when you have things like we're not just talking about a self-help book, okay, which is questionable. You can say, well, this guy wrote it, John. I think the guy who wrote it, he's wrong about this. He's wrong about this. We're talking about a concept like infallibility, divine word. It has to be true. If you are going to reinterpret it, you can try to reinterpret it, but there are limitations to that. The apocalypse, angels writing down what you're saying, and then a horrific eternal punishment if you do the wrong thing, and a heavenly reward if you do the right thing, and getting people to really believe it. That non-believers, tribal identification. You have the believers, Ya ayyuhal mu'minina, Ya ayyuhal, I can't pronounce it very well, but all of those things. Oh, you who believe, right? That appears repeatedly throughout the Quran. Right? Talking about the believers. Don't take Jews and Christians for your friends, even if it's in a certain historical context. Right? All of those things, they encourage tribalism. The idea that this is a timeless book for all time, and it has things that only supposedly apply to certain contexts. The problem is all these people who are interpreting it, all of these people who are interpreting it that you're talking about, that you're quoting, they're all human beings. They're looking at it, they're interpreting it. So when you're getting your understanding of Islam from the scholars, you're getting your understanding from human beings.
Of course.
Right? So what you have is basically a God who is so, he's got the literal word, and they're saying, okay, listen, forget about the literal word of God. Don't read that because you're not going to understand it. God is not as articulate as this book that I wrote. Read this and then you'll understand, because I really explained it well. I explained God's word to you in a way that you can understand, because you're not going to understand it if he explains it, because he's so out of touch with you. He can't say his stuff clearly, right? So this is all of this stuff, this interpretive gymnastics, the scholars interpreting this stuff for people, right, is also, a political, it's all part of a political system, right? It is inherently, all of the Abrahamic religions, actually, all 3 of them are inherently political. Even all of the other religions, Hinduism, all of these things are political too. In Hinduism, the Banu Samriti, right, that one book, that has more of the political side of it. The other things are sort of more spiritual and self-learning, self-improvement, that kind of thing. But there's I don't think that it's a very unconvincing argument, very unconvincing if you have actually sat down and read the Quran, which says 6 times in it that this is a fully detailed book. It's completely clear. There's no doubt about it. This is all you need. You have a Quran that actually says that about itself 6 times, and you're reading it, and apparently you need a whole bunch of other things to understand it. It doesn't make any sense. So
a lot of what you said, I don't disagree with, but I think we still have to come back to the fact that the Quran by itself is not, even if it says it's enough and whatever, the scholars over the years clearly had to codify, the creed, the systems of fiqh, and even when it comes to, I think this is an interesting point that's worth discussing. When we see modern states such as, for example, Pakistan and, for example, Saudi Arabia, and these Islamic states, or states that they're trying to have Islamic law, I wanted to quote from an article called "How to Create an Islamic Government, Not an Islamic State" by Asifa Qureshi Landis, Associate Professor of Law at University of Wisconsin. She says states like Pakistan and Iran are not following an established model for Islamic government. They're following a colonial European model with a few Muslim add-ons. The European nation state is based on the idea of legal monism, where all law comes from the state. But pre-colonial Muslim legal system were based on legal pluralism. So what she's saying is there's 2 different things. And I was discussing with my friend Khalil Amdani, who's also studying Islam at Harvard, teaching Islam at Harvard. There's two things in Islamic law, or in the governmental law of Islamic empires. There's siyasa, which is the kind of global, laws that are made for the well-being of society that could have, like, let's say taxes or whatever. And then there's the fiqh. And the fiqh is articulated by religious scholars. So you have the local fiqh the ulama that people would go to for divorce, for any sort of legal rulings, right? And
but Abdullah, you made that point already, that there's many different, like you're just repeating the point
what
that you
what
made
I'm saying
before.
now is
They're different.
yeah.
That doesn't negate what I'm saying.
I'm not saying there's
The fact-
different. I'm not saying I'm making a different point. I'm making a different point that the politics is not necessarily something that's part of the state, and it never was until recently. With recent Islamic movements, for example, for example, the Islamics, right?
You keep referring to what
Muslim. What I'm trying to say is
because you're doing the same thing.
Armin, wait.
No, but you keep referring to the fact that Islam is becoming political in very new ways that it wasn't political before.
That is the point I'm making. That it's.
I agree with you on that, but it was political in different ways at other times. Mm-hmm. And even if it was not political in bringing up history, which is good. But the thing is that when you bring up history, you're talking about Muslims. Okay, I'm talking about Islams. You keep talking about Muslims, even if not a single Muslim in history ever made Islam political in any way, what the Quran says is political. Okay, even let's say it's a modern invention. First of all, it's not. There's other ways that Islam was political in history. Maybe the new ways that Islam is political is very closer to I agree with European inventions of parliaments and all that stuff, voting and all that stuff. So it's the new ways of Islam being political, completely different. But historically, it was political in different ways. But even if it was never political, the Quran is political. It just means Muslims didn't follow the Quran. Okay, that's one thing. Okay. But again, all of these differences doesn't really negate the fact that there is one true Islam. Because if by your standard of not having one true Islam, okay, if the fact that you have one true Islam and then branches come out of it in there's subcategories of Islam, okay, but the top category that all these subcategories exist under is a true definition of what Islam is. But if we go by your standard, just because something branches out of the main category, therefore there is no one true Islam, even if we only had Salafi Islam,
okay,
I'm pretty sure no two Salafis would agree with everything on each other, right? So you could be like, well, there's no true Salafi Islam, okay? There's no true Salafi Islam because not every two Salafis agree with each other, right? But there is one true Salafi Islam, because whatever defines Salafi Islam, it refers to specific thing that makes them all Salafi. You know what I mean? There will be not one true. Like I could be like, okay, there is not one true. Okay, so one branch of Islam is what? Shia, 12er Shia Islam, not all 12er Shia Islam. Vilayat al-Faqih, Khomeinism, 12er Shia Islam. Okay, I could tell you like, well, there's not even one true that. Because I can tell you you can't find two people in this group that agree with each other on everything. So there's not one true anything. There's not one true any belief system if that's your standard.
Okay, so Abdullah, what were you saying about the Asifa Qureshi and Siyasa? What was
I was just saying that and Armin, like he said, he agreed with me that the modern Islamic state, the modern Islamist movement, that the idea of bringing hudud law into a state level government, like universal application, is not historically found among Muslims. This is a modern phenomenon. What Saudi is doing, what Pakistan is doing, it was never implemented in that sense. That's all I was saying. But
I agree with that. I
want to talk about what Armin was saying. Armin, when you say, like, I kind of get your point, but I don't totally get it. When I thought when we were discussing this, that the whole point of this conversation was that I was bringing forth the argument that Salafi Islam is not more correct than Ismailism or Ahmadiyya Islam. All of them are in different ways, a human effort of interpretation and interaction with the text. Do you disagree with that, or do you agree with that? All of them are equal valid?
Depends on what you mean by correct. If by correct it means one of them is more Islam than the other one, no, I disagree. No, they're all Islam.
Is one of them more correct? Because when we say one true Islam,
no. See, I was trying to separate what the definitions of correct, but then you merged it together. So I'm saying if by correct you mean one of them is Islam and the other one isn't, I disagree with that. They're both Islam. Okay, but if by correct you mean one of them is closer to a literal interpretations of the Quran, then I agree. One of them is
Why
more
is
correct than the other.
literal more correct in this case? Now, for example,
I didn't say literal means more correct. I said if by correct you mean closer to.
So-
that's why I said if. So if by correct you mean one of them is Islam and one of them isn't, no, they're both
No, I'm not
correct.
saying that. I'm
They're
not saying
I think literal means more correct.
So-
I do. I think literal. Of course, why wouldn't
Okay,
literal?
so if by literal you mean more correct, then yes, one of them is more correct.
No, but let's ask that question. But why is it? You know, when you're saying why is literal more correct? I mean, anytime you read anything by anyone, right? The whole point of writing anything is to whatever you write down should mean something. Like, you know, the reader should be able to understand what you mean by the words that you're using. Now, the thing is, like, I wrote a book, right? Armin wrote a book. Now, if there was something in it, like, I'm not gonna tell them, okay, well, you know, this doesn't really literally mean this. What I actually meant was this, and I can interpret it any way you want to. You know, like it's a bunch of Rorschach tests where you can just look at it and get whatever interpretation you want out of it. I mean, it's not that's not what it's supposed to be. If you read Robinson Crusoe, if you read like any book, right? Well, some of them are more sort of abstract than others, but you read and you get out of them what the book says. Literal, we apply that to everything else. Applies it to everything else. The only time we try to move away from literal stuff is if something is really outdated, it doesn't sit well with our own inherent sense of right and wrong, our morality, and we have to find a way to make it fit. Like the U.S. Constitution. That's the other thing that they talk about, literal. Oh, the Second Amendment, what does it mean? Can you have a gun? Can you have nuclear arms? What does it mean, right to bear arms? Can we carry around nukes? You know, there's all these, like, they try to interpret it in the context of the modern time, because they can't change it. I mean, they can change it, but they don't want to, because it's like the Bible for them. Right? That's the way Muslims read the Quran. There's nothing else out there apart from these kinds of documents that people find just sacred and unchangeable, that people say, well, you know, you got to look at something else. You can't just look at the literal meaning of it. Yes, there is allegory. There's, you know, a metaphor. There are things like that. They're fairly obvious when it comes to poetry and other things like that. And yes, you'll argue that the Quran is poetry, but there are things in the Quran that are not just poetry. It says literally what it means to say. Like, you know, you were talking about Surah 5, verse 38, when it says chop off the hand of the thief. That literally means chop off the hand of the thief. I mean, you can interpret it by saying, you know, well, restrict their hands because you're not comfortable with the idea of chopping off people's hands in the 21st century. But we all know that, you know, that's not the case. If I'm held to account for every word I write in my book, and if I try to explain it away, they will cancel me on Twitter. And if Allah was here and he was on Twitter and he tried to explain the Quran the same way, like it would be a disaster. Am I a better writer than him? Why am I held to account for my book than he is for his?
So I don't totally disagree. Sorry, 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I don't totally disagree with what you're saying, but I do disagree in some way. Like I do agree that when it says chop off the hands, it means chop off the hands, not like restrict them and give them flowers. When it says don't drink alcohol, you know, I'm taking the apparent meaning that don't drink alcohol, not
that's actually more vague.
Do not. But anyway, so I'm not trying to say that we should make it all flowery and whatever, but I'm saying even the process of saying that I'm saying the context, I'm saying to apply these rules, if you just like who said that whatever the Quran said needs to be applied the same way in today's world necessarily?
Different
that's
topic,
a human
though.
Okay, so but let's go back to let me ask you this, because we were going on about this.
No, but I just want to ask. I just want to answer.
Don't forget what you're going to ask.
I'm sorry. I just want to address that one thing before you go on to Armin. Is that why shouldn't the literal interpretation of something be the best one when we have the words out there and they're relatively clear?
But it doesn't say for all time that this needs to be done this way. It does not literally say that in the Quran. That's the hadith. Now you have to take the hadith corpus and add that as well, and then you have to interpret that.
Book that says that, because it's implicit. It's implicit that I wrote these words. These words mean what they say. It's a way of communication. Why do you write words? You words so that people can read it and they can communicate. The first revelation is Iqra. It means to read, right? It's telling. So you're supposed to read it and you're supposed to understand the words.
I think the making of the religion is a lot more than what Muhammad put in the Quran, because Muhammad didn't even compile it into a book before he died. I think the companions and then the scholars for the last 1,000 years have codified this religion and made it into something that it's made it into something bigger than it was when Muhammad was alive. Like, he didn't even leave directions on who was going to be the next leader. Like, that much of a disaster when he died, and there was a huge waves of apostasy and all that, because it's not clear what is the Islamic form. What is it, according to Muslims,
they made it bigger. They just branched out to different. Okay, you have the root of the tree, and it branches out to so many different ways, and the tree becomes bigger and it grows, but the root is the same. Okay, the root is, all these branches are coming.
Yeah.
What the fact that the branches are going in the different direction is not the definition of Islam. And what we're saying when we talking about Islam is referring to the trunk of the tree. We're not, I understand that it's going into, and that when I point to that, to the root, to the source of everything, I'm pointing to one thing. Okay, I am acknowledge that it has branched to so many different shapes and forms, but that's not what I'm pointing at when I say Islam. I'm pointing to the what they have in common. I'm not pointing to all their differences. So even though I agree with Ali that yes, the literal interpretation is the most correct version, but even if that wasn't true, even if the Quran was written in a way that it was all vague, and you could get so many different interpretations out of it, and they were all equally possible, which is not right now not the case. Some interpretations are way more likely to get out of than the other ones. But even if they were all equally the same, if the Quran was all of it was vague, it will still not negate what I'm saying. Their definition would, based on the definition I have, there would be one true Islam. Okay, true Islam.
So I'm seeing a lot of comments about zakat. Let's just talk about zakat for 1 second.
No, what was the question you were going to ask me? Do you remember?
Okay, what I wanted to ask you was, okay, so the way I saw this conversation, I'm a little bit confused, is the reason why I brought this up is because I've heard this before, that there's one true Islam, and the one true Islam is ISIS or Salafism, or
no, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, but that's what so when I came into this conversation, I wanted to make it clear that I don't think that ISIS is inherently more Islamic than, say, Ahmadis. Now, I know it sounds weird to say that, but I think both of them are using a human effort of interpretation, and in both cases, the one thing I disagree with Muslims on is most Muslims, other than ISIS, will say ISIS is not Islam at all. It has nothing to do with Islam, and that's where I kind of disagree.
That's not what I'm. That's okay. What I would say is that, ISIS's interpretation of Islam is closer to a literal interpretation of the Quran than. That's what I would say.
But it's more. It's not though. It's not just because what.
Hold on. Let me finish one thought before you respond. But what I would not say that ISIS is Islam and who else? Give me somebody else.
Ismailis.
Ismailis are not Islam.
Alavis,
I would not say that. Okay.
But would you say Ismailis are less Islamic than ISIS?
No.
Okay, so we don't actually disagree then.
No, but I disagree on the word you use the word Islam. Okay, because I've had this experience with people with God, so you're saying I had this frustration with the whole discussion around the existence of God for more than a decade. Okay, so I'm familiar with people trying to change definitions of things and how unhelpful it is, right? So you're trying to say okay, there is no evidence for God, we shouldn't believe in God because there's no evidence for it. And people are like, well, there's different ways to look at God, and people could mean by God, they could mean love. By God, they could mean energy. By God, they could mean mathematics.
Turtles.
By God, they could mean nature, just the forces of nature. Okay, all of those things that you just listed exist. Okay, if that's what you mean by God, then God is real. Okay, but we have different words. We already have words for those things. Okay, when I say there's no evidence for God, I'm talking about the conscious creator of the universe. And if you try to come up with different definitions for God, you can do that, and your God exists, but you're not being helpful. You're just confusing the conversation. And you know who else had experience with confusing the conversation? Like, oh, people, we could move to the direction that God means something else slowly. God, well, you're not helping, okay? Because we still have people that believe in a conscious creator of the universe. We have this God word to refer to that, so we could actually agree that what we're all talking about. And instead of actually debating whether or not there's an evidence for that, your solution is like, hey, let's make God mean something else. How is that helping? That's not helping. Like people like, for example, Einstein and Stephen Hawking had this experience. They use the word gods for things that exist in nature. They didn't believe in a conscious creator of the universe, but they used the word God to be poetic and shit. And that backfired on them. A lot of people tried to make it so like, oh, look, these extremely smart people believe in a conscious creator of the universe. So then that's the smartest thing to do. Like, no, they don't. And they themselves had to back when they saw how much confusion that was creating. They had to be like spend many years clarifying that that's not what they actually believe in. So I disagree with Ali as well. It's like, oh, Islam is moving in the right. The definition is moving to something else. Well, right now it means this. Okay, right now it means this. And if it's moving in that direction, I'm going to try to stop it. Okay, because now we know what. Like right now, generally we know what we mean when we say Islam. If you try to make Islam mean something else, you're going to make our job harder because we're fighting Islam, and now I have to come up with a new name for what I'm actually fighting, and no one's going to know I'm fighting the belief in the Quran, okay? Or belief in, and now I have to come up with a new name for it because you changed the name that it already has. Okay. So how's that helping?
Okay, I gotta say one thing. So we're gonna have to. I have one more thing to ask you about because we have. We're gonna do up to 20 minutes for patron questions, so we have about 8 minutes. I think when you were saying is ISIS more Islamic than Ismaili
Ahmadi or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think, but I sort of not totally completely agree with Armin about that Islam, that all of it's the same. Again, I always like defining. I like it clear that Islam
they're all the same.
The codified is the Quran codifies Islam inside it, and then there's Muslims, and Muslims act, they in accordance with whatever their interpretation is. But that's a completely different thing. But I would say one thing. I would say that whatever ISIS does, the vast majority of things that they do are consistent with Islam. They're consistent.
I agree with you, Ali. I agree with you, Ali.
So I wouldn't say that they're more Islamic or that is the one true Islam. I don't think I don't think any of us has said that ISIS is the one true Islam. But what we say that everything that ISIS does,
right?
Like, even that thing when they burned that guy alive, that's a disputed. It's a disputed thing, but that punishment does exist in the hadith, right? Throwing gays off rooftops.
When they beheaded the Christians, that was not Islamic.
Right. So what wasn't?
When the ISIS people, remember, they took all the Christians on the beach and beheaded them. That was un-Islamic. They were Ahl al-Kitab. You can't just behead Christians. You can't.
No. Well, I mean, there's again, when you go into the hadith, because they go into all of the hadiths, they take all of them. But anyway, so if you count the hadith, the whole body of hadith as part of Islam, then it is right. It is consistent with it. So this is what the problem is. But I don't think anybody says that's the one true Islam.
Some people do actually. Some people do, and actually, this is something that I think is wrong, and we shouldn't say, because I've had people tell me, and which is why I wrote the article debunking the one true Islam fallacy. And the article starts with me showing a tweet where it literally says ISIS is the one true Islam, and all you guys, moderate Muslims, are not true Muslims.
So we're talking about different things. But hold on.
Yeah, so
here's the thing.
But I want to say one more thing, Armin. Hold on. So now with the Ismailism, okay, the reason that I think that that's also actually quite consistent with the Quran, right? Quite consistent with the Quran is because, for instance, the Quran doesn't specify 5 days of prayer, 5 times of prayer a day. It doesn't say how you're supposed to pray. So for all you know, you can sit and, the Ismaili form of prayer, which is very different from the Salah that, mainstream Muslims do, completely different, is completely legitimate. You can sit and meditate for 5 minutes. That would be completely legitimate and consistent with the Quran, because the Quran doesn't specify a language or how many times you should pray or anything. The way that you should fast, that you shouldn't have water all day. There's so many things in the Quran about these practices that are not actually there. Oh, did Abdullah disappear?
No, wait. He removed himself.
I'm
He's
still
trying.
here. I was trying to share my screen, but it didn't
Oh,
work.
okay. So yeah.
Okay.
So I do think that all of those things are different versions of Islam, right? But I think that they're consistent. But I just don't deny that everything ISIS does is not consistent.
Let me clarify for Abdullah I think I understand what the confusion is. Okay, what we agree on and what we agree on and what we disagree on. Okay, Abdullah, I agree that it's wrong to say that what ISIS believes in isn't the one true Islam. Okay, if somebody says that ISIS is one true Islam, I disagree. If somebody says 12 version of Shia Islam is the one true Islam, I disagree. If somebody says Ismaili Islam is the one true Islam, I disagree. But just because none of these is one true Islam, that doesn't mean there is no such thing as one true Islam. There is such a thing as one true Islam, but that one true thing is one category that encompasses all of them. There is one true, like just because none of these covers what the whole definition umbrella of what is Islam, that doesn't mean that there is no border to what is Islamic and what's not Islamic. Do you know what I mean? Like that, just for example, just because there's multiple subcategories in your category, that doesn't mean there's no the category itself does not exist. Like some people keep referring to all the subcategories and how diverse the subcategories are and use it as an excuse to say the borders of what is in and what is not out also doesn't exist. So they take it one step further to say as if like the lines are completely not there. So you understand what I'm trying to say? Like there's a box that you put all these things in, and I agree that there's so many things in it and they're all somewhat different, but the box itself exists, and there's such a thing as inside the box and outside of the box.
Mm-hmm. Can I just address some of the comments? I'm seeing comments saying by
we'll do that, Abdullah. We'll do that.
Did that make sense?
I don't.
Said to you?
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I don't think we disagree, though.
Okay.
We disagree on the way we use the word Islam.
Okay, so I think that we've gone at everybody right now. We're kind of repeating ourselves a little bit. So let's do this. We've got. Let's take 3 minutes. Remainder 3 minutes. Samir, I want you to have the last word. So have the last word. Say your concluding thing. Okay, and then we're going to go to patron questions for the next 20 minutes.
Okay. So in conclusion, I'm not sure how much we disagree or not disagree actually, but
I don't think we disagree on that much.
I think there's no my concluding remarks is there's no true Islam. There's no one true Islam, and that any sort of manifestation of Islam is always going to be a human interaction with the text. Some of them through the scholars or the chain of scholarship, for example, Sufis, Hamza Yusuf and that crew. Salafis, for example, they skip out a lot of that. ISIS, they skip out even more of that, and the even more sort of, cut and paste application, blind application of hadith directly in today's world. And I think all of these are different manifestations of Islam. There's no one true Islam. That's basically my thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's move on to the patron questions. Armin,
I thought everybody gets the last word. No?
Okay. That wasn't the rule, but okay, let's do that. Let's go with it. I wanted Abdullah to have the last word.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that Islam, if Islam could mean anything, then it means nothing at all. Okay? For Islam to mean something, it has to have a definition, or else it would be a useless term that we might as well just throw it away. Okay? If it has a definition, it needs to define for a word to have a definition, it needs to define its borders. For something to be outside of that definition and inside of the definition, you have to create a border for it. You have to create some lines drawn that what's considered Islam and what's not Islam. If you don't have those lines, then you don't have a definition. If you have a definition and you have those lines, then there are such things that are Islam and there are things that are not Islam. And once you create a category, that category becomes the one true Islam. That category could have different subcategories, but you still now have things that are Islam and things that are not Islam. And now that you have a definition, that definition is the one true Islam. So just because you have subcategories of something, that doesn't mean you don't have such a thing that is the one true Islam.
But why are you calling it one true Islam? Why don't you say there's multiple Islams? Like, it sounds like you're agreeing with me, but you're just calling it one true Islam. It includes everything, and I'm saying there's multiple Islams.
Well,
not one true Islam.
Multiple
just because a category, hold on, let me just answer him, Ali. Just because one category has subcategories, that doesn't mean you have more than one category. You have one category that includes subcategories. It's very simple.
Is it just semantics then? Then why do you say one true Islam? Because one true Islam implies there's other not true Islams.
Yes, for example, here, Christianity is not Islam.
Nobody says Christianity is Islam. Now it's just getting absurd, right?
No,
people don't say Judaism is Islam or like Scientology is Islam.
You have a definition.
So what's the point of your definition then of one true Islam that includes Ahmadiyya and Ismaili and Shia and Sunni and everything? And
the whole point of definition is to define what is inside and what is outside. Like, okay, is it so? Is it?
But it's not one Islam then. It's multiple Islams.
I think
you understand that
of Islam.
Do you understand that just because
a category
has subcategories, do you agree that doesn't mean that you have just if my category of Islam has subcategories, that doesn't mean you have now two categories. You still have one category. It's very simple.
So I'll tell you from a listener's perspective, this is now going in circles. You guys have all made your point.
Okay, just to respond to people that say totally semantics, that's the point of this. And like, why people say like, oh, it's totally semantics, so we shouldn't have this discussion. The whole point of this discussion is about semantics. It's about definition. So when people say it's just semantics, it is just semantics, but semantics matter. People say it's just semantics as if definitions don't matter. The whole point of this discussion is to figure out what the definition is. The whole point of this conversation is to figure out what the semantics are. So it is the semantics, and semantics are important because without having an agreement on what we're talking about, communication becomes impossible. And like, how can we even disagree or agree on whether Islam is good or bad if we're not even talking about the same things? Semantics matter.
Okay, now I get that everybody got their. So now that everybody's getting the last word, I'll tell you. Here's my last statement. You know what terrifies every Islamic scholar out there? Every single one of them, except for the most fundamentalist one. The one thing that terrifies them is they just say, "Do not read the Quran literally. Please don't." They're terrified. They're like, "Oh, if you read the Quran literally, you're going to get it all wrong. Don't read it literally. Don't read the Word of God exactly as He wrote it. But here, look at my human book that I wrote and look at that interpretation and follow that because I can explain that."
But the Quran itself says don't take it all literally too, right? It actually says that.
Just tell people to stop believing in bullshit.
The Quran says there's verses that are clear and there's verses that are allegorical.
I know.
Yeah.
Surah verse 3 Surah 3 verse 7 you're talking about.
Yeah.
And even that has multiple interpretations, right? So it's saying that God is very, very clear in everything that He wants to say.
Yeah, and there are some of them trying to whitewash Islam.
Then it says
you guys are whitewashing Islam. I'm not going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you guys whitewash Islam.
Armin, hold on. So, and it says that some of these verses are allegorical, and it is the fools who don't know who actually take I'm paraphrasing now, who take the allegorical and they run with it when the word is clear. So there's different interpretations of that too. And we have discussed that on this podcast, that specific verse, and we discuss it with the two doctors, the Nasser brothers.
So I think I agree with Armin that Islam is an umbrella term and it has boundaries. It's not anything at all. Right. I just don't use the word one Islam. I say there's multiple, but whatever.
Okay, fine. We agree. And there's only one true umbrella. It's one true umbrella.
It's like one true God. Okay, guys, listen, we're done. We're good with this. Okay,
okay.
We're good. Right. Okay, now let's move on to patron questions. There was another topic on this that we put in the description that was about what is the definition of a Muslim. I actually find that a lot more interesting because I want to know whether it's someone who believes in Islam or whether it's a birth identity. But we're not going to talk about that now. We're going to do that next time. Let's just start.
What's the question? What's a Muslim?
Yeah, what's the definition of a Muslim? Do not start on that.
Yeah, I'm not going to start. I'm just going to say I'm going to agree with you that that's a lot of people think that that's the same topic as today. That's a completely different discussion.
It's a much
more completely different discussion.
because there's a
Yes.
lot more variation there. So
Let's have another episode on Muslim.
we'll do. And Abdullah, would you want to do that episode? Would you want to come back?
Yes.
And talk?
I'm not sure what the big difference is.
Okay, so not Abdullah then. Somebody that somebody that
No,
can
no,
see
no,
the
I love
difference.
that.
I'm confused. Like, what? Why is that a big episode? I don't get it.
It's a
That's
very
a
big
completely
episode.
different.
Because
it's
we're going to
very
talk about
different.
is Muslim, is the word Muslim, a Muslim person, is that are they defined by belief or are they defined by birth identity? Because
Or
when
by
Allah
culture.
talks about 2,000
Culture,
countries,
birth.
there's going to be like 50, like
Okay.
2 billion Muslims in the world. They're not talking about belief. They're talking about people born in Muslim families. So what does the word
This
Muslim
is-
really mean today?
Ali is just trying to sell his book, Why Atheist Muslim is Not a Contradiction. That's why he's doing this. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, because so atheist Islam, one of the Islams. It's under your umbrella, Armin. Okay. Let's, you can interpret your way into whatever you want. So let's do these questions. So do you have control, Armin? So you're going to have to.
Oh, no, I don't. Oh, wait. I have to go. Oh, shit.
I can't bring the questions on the screen. Only you can.
Whoa, so I have to go all the way
to the
top?
top. All the way to the top.
That's-
All right, guys.
Should I only read the ones that have tagged particular
okay.
genres?
I'll read the Mars one. So when you find it 10, 12
Yep.
p.m. Mars.
Oh, yeah, great. 10, 12. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Give me the number like that. I could.
All right. So Mars is asking, does the notion of a true Islam negate what we consider orthodox today? For example, the Hajj was a pagan ritual absorbed into it, like Christmas into Christianity.
Well, the Hajj is definitely part of Islam, and so that's already part of Islam. I think a better example would be something like a much better example would be Mawlid, because that was not originally part of Islam, and it became for Sufis. By Mawlid, I mean the celebration of the birthday of the Prophet, right? So maybe that's a better example.
Yeah, I'm more flexible than you, Abdullah, because I believe somebody that doesn't believe in Hajj is still Muslim. If they believe in the Quran and God and Muhammad as prophet, I still consider
weird because the Hajj is right in the Quran, but yeah, I guess it's somehow.
Well, because I include people that believe in the Quran as a direct word of God, but have never read the Quran. So even though Hajj is directly in the Quran, my definition of the belief of Islam is a belief system that includes people that don't believe in Hajj because they haven't read the Quran. See, I'm even more. My umbrella is even bigger than your umbrella. So I'm even more.
Oh yeah, well my umbrella is bigger than all of you. Wait, hold on. Armin is Persian. I'm Indian. Okay, no.
Yeah, you lose that battle.
Okay, listen. 10:16 p.m. Aaron Jones.
10:16.
It's a comment, but it's a really interesting one. So she's saying that Christians don't really argue like this as long as a denomination accepts Jesus. The rest is up to interpretation. So this is actually something that Tom Holland, remember Tom Holland from Shadow of the Sword, the author? So he was telling me about this some time ago. We wrote that book Dominion recently that came out, where he said that Christianity in this way is more open to interpretation that way. I don't really know whether it evolved to be that way, right? After all of those, after the Dark Ages and the Reformation, the Enlightenment, or whether it was always like this. But either way, I mean, there's good signs for it. But yeah, there's this idea that Christianity, as long as you believe in Jesus, right, that is your goal. If you believe in Jesus, you're a Christian. And then after that, whatever you do with it, it's
there's also one true Christianity. There's many different subcategories of Christianity, but the one true definition of Christianity is believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Everything else is.
But that's actually the thing. There aren't three variables. There isn't, like, the belief in the Bible is not part of. It's just accepting Jesus as your Savior.
That's why Bible. That's why I didn't include believing in the Bible as in the definition.
Yeah.
It's
So as much as we talk about the Bible and the Quran together and everything, this is actually true. Is that that the Bible really is secondary to believing Jesus as the thing. So that's an interesting.
The Quran is part of the definition of Islam for me, at least. I think that's the most useful definition. But the Bible is not part of the definition I use for Christianity.
Right. So okay, then at 10:21 p.m. from Mike.
10:21.
Okay. Kulik. No, the other one. No, one after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think we already talked about that one. So Christians do, so he's countering that, Mike. He's saying Christians do argue, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses say that they're the only true shit and everyone else will die in Armageddon. And that's true. There is sectarian argument. We clearly know that. from Catholics and the Protestants and the Reformation, Ireland, everything, so they do argue. So, okay, let's go to a question.
Wait, what? Give me a timestamp.
I'm going through it right now.
Right now.
When I'm going through the questions, you're supposed to do the. You guys are supposed to shoot the shit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Abdullah, do you realize why I'm very triggered by this whole not having one true Islam is because if I feel like the diversity within Islam is giving an excuse for people to throw away the entire definition, right? So, for example, if you like, it's kind of like saying, "Hey, look, I can't tell where the red stops, and the purple begins. So there is no such thing as red." You know what I mean? So this is what because people use like, "Oh, look, ISIS believes in one thing, Ismailis believe in one thing, Salafis believe in one thing. I don't know, 12er Shias believe in one thing." So who knows what's Islam? Everything is Islam. We go, well, everybody, your Islam is my, like everybody, anything could be Islam. Okay. So, when you said it's absurd, like, of course that's not Islam, but that's where we're moving to. Okay. The reason is that people are trying to remove point to the diversity to remove the definition completely. And by removing the definition completely, they're trying to make it difficult for you to even criticize Islam because you don't even have a target anymore.
Well,
that's why p.m.
You can specify. You can say this specific branch of Islam has these issues. I don't think
the problem is that all of Islam has an issue. Okay, here's what I have a problem. The belief in the Quran is a problem. And I refer to that as Islam. And you guys are trying to take that word away from me. And you guys, like, what you're trying to do is like making me explain, like I have to use a sentence to rather than a word to define my activism.
Yeah, but it's so different. Like, I don't even talk to Quranists because I don't understand where they're coming from. Like, I've had once or twice Quranists come and try to talk to me, and I'm like, I don't really get what you.
I'm not talking about the Quranists. The Quranists, what the Quranists and the vast majority of Muslims are not Quranists, right?
Yeah, obviously.
What the Quranists share with the non-Quranists, the vast majority of non-Quranists, is my definition of Islam. You know what I mean? So the Quran is what unites them all.
I don't know, guys. You guys are just supposed to shoot the shit. Okay, so 10:42 p.m. Omema is asking.
Hold on.
And I'll start reading the question. Isn't Sharia law inherently political, a legal system designed to govern a specific group of people? So that's one question. There's another one related to it, just two lower by Yasin Al-Fatah. He's asking, why would an apolitical system say that whoever rules by anything other than what Allah revealed is a disbeliever? So kind of related questions.
Abdullah, can you reduce your volume because we're getting a little bit of echo?
My headphones back on. Yep. Sorry. Okay.
We're still getting it. Because
how is it now? Is it good now?
Oh, it's great.
Okay. Yeah. Still echo?
Yeah, Ali, I think is it you?
No, it's not me. I have headphones.
I don't hear it. I don't hear.
You have headphones, Ali?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I noticed that too. At one point, there was echo.
The person that is not hearing it is because of the echo.
Yeah, in the stream. Can I answer this question?
Yeah, it's for you. It's all of them.
So isn't Sharia law inherently political? I mean, Muslims, when they talk about Sharia, sometimes they do include praying and fasting and stuff like that. But yeah, and that's why I did bring up that whole thing about how Sharia law today that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and these countries are implementing. It's a very modern new thing where they're taking something that was implemented by local judges and it's merged with this nation state idea of and this isn't really what Muslims did for the last 1,000 years. This is a very modern new kind of innovation, you can say, right? That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the second part of
yes, the second part of the question. Can you read the second part of the question? Why would an apolitical system say that whoever rules by anything other than what Allah revealed is a disbeliever? That's a good point, actually. My response to that would be that there's, again, I would say you can take this literally, but you have to look at the context, because the Quran itself doesn't talk about how to rule, like whether there's a caliphate, whether there's a democracy, how do you pick the ruler. None of that is really defined in the Quran, right? But you have to look at the hadith as well, and then how the hadith is interpreted. That whole process, right? The Sharia law and going back to the whole siyasa versus, fiqh, the fiqh and the fatwas that came across from the ulama were not legally binding, right? Unless you went to a qadi, which was a state enforced judge that would, divorce you from your wife or whatever. There's different levels, right? And so in history, what we see with Muslims is there was this, and that article I shared earlier is really great. I think I'm just going to share it again. It kind of goes into a little bit of nuance here, that like how there's different levels of governance, and there's the state level and the local level. But in regards to this specific question, I don't know. You guys want to talk about it? Like, I think
it's good. I think you addressed it. I want to move on to, there's another question at 10:53 p.m. from Matt Rose. He's saying, could the Quranist sect, be the one true Islam? Okay, because you could make an argument that the ahadith are taken out by each sect's favorite ahadith.
It's very difficult to make that case.
I think the problem with Quranism is it's just so, it's, first of all, it's not like nobody's Quranist, basically. Like almost nobody is Quranist. And there's a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
And it's very wishy-washy. Like, it's, how do you, without some sort of context around the Quran from the hadith or the seerah, whether it's Shia hadith or Sunni hadith, it's just very strange. Like, what is the Quran even saying? Because the words have changed, and it becomes a kind of self-help manual, like Ali, you said. I don't know.
Not even that. Like 4 out of 5 pillars in Islam comes from the hadith.
Yeah.
4 out of 5 comes from a hadith. You left with like what? La ilaha illallah, shahadat. You have nothing else left.
I disagree.
How are you going to do the salat? How are you going to do the hajj? What's the zakat? All of it is.
I disagree. If it's the whole idea. If it's not mentioned, then it's not in the Quran. Then look, you got to really, really zoom out. So the Quran becomes very, very broad. Okay, a lot of it becomes actually nonsensical. So you can pretty much ignore that. Say, oh, I will only understand that when God explains it to me. And the Quran, again, itself says it's 6 points. And a hadith. I was a Quranist for a little while, right? And because the Quran itself says at 6 points that this is a fully detailed book, and you don't need anything outside of it, which sort of implies that it's rejecting the hadith. The Quranists actually say that this means that you don't really need the hadith. Now,
the Quran also has verses that
hold on. Yeah. So the thing is, what are the hadith? The hadith for the Sunni mainstream is the stuff that was collected by Bukhari and Muslim, and those volumes. What is it for the Shia 12ers? Is what the imams said about them, right? About the imams. Yeah, they got them. So the sources of hadith are different. That's why they pray differently. So they fast differently. They do everything differently. Hold on to the cable of Allah, that verse, right? That just means for one sect, it means faith. For the Ismailis, for instance, it means the imamah, right? It means like hold on to the chain of the imams. So I was going to say the beautiful thing, because that's how I used to think. But the great thing about the Quranism is exactly what you're saying. It's exactly what you're saying. That it just says to pray sunrise and sunset, and you can decide whatever the hell you want to do with it. It doesn't say anything specifics about pilgrimage. You can decide whatever the hell you want to do with it. You don't need anything else. It leaves a lot more up to you. That's why Quranists like it.
I consider Quranists as a fringe part of Islam. So I consider Quranists as Muslims, okay? And if you have a Quranist worldview, your worldview is part of Islam. But it's also, so I include my umbrella is very big. But it's very bizarre to me, like what that Islam is will be unrecognizable by the vast majority of Muslims today. Like they would have no idea what they're looking at if that was Islam. Like they would.
By your argument, that's irrelevant as long as it's the Quran.
Again, that's why I'm ignoring all of them and say, this is Islam, because my definition includes them. So, but I'm also pointing out that most Muslims do not recognize that as Islam. They couldn't. They would, even if they look at it, they wouldn't even know what they're looking at.
Abdullah, you have anything?
I personally think if Muhammad was alive today, what he sees of Islam, he would not recognize today, because so much has
If he was even
changed.
real.
Sorry?
If he was even real.
Well, I do think there's evidence.
Muhammad is real.
I do think there's evidence,
He
but I
was
don't want to
real.
get to that. Can we go to the next question?
Yeah, the next
Yeah.
question right under that from
Yeah.
Umema is how do you believe in zakat, the most unproblematic part of Islam, and not see it as political?
Oh, that is very problematic. Extremely problematic part of Islam.
I agree with Umema there. I think it's relatively unproblematic.
Oh my
I
God. You
understand
guys,
the classist argument and all that, but it is relatively, it is as compared to everything else.
one of
Zakat.
the most problematic part of Islam. But go on.
Reza Aslan says that zakat was actually very progressive, and it actually brought, a sort of this charity tax, this holding tax, is actually something good for the Islamic community. I won't go into whether it's good or bad. I know it's very easy to work around, and I know many Muslim countries have it as part of the laws there that you have to pay zakat. But what happens is people will take the money out of the account and put it back in there the next day, so the balance goes below the nisab. Because if you have to have at least a nisab, which is, let's say, $2,000 or whatever the nisab is, the minimum amount. So they have these little tricks they play with.
They have workarounds and everything.
They have workarounds for everything, right?
What do you think of the question, though?
Yeah, so the question is a great question, because it implies again that zakat is something that is political, but many Muslims see zakat as a personal sort of donation that they make, right? It's not even political for them anymore. Yes, in Muslim countries, it may be the law, or the banking system may have it as part of the banks that you have to pay zakat or something. I don't even know how that works. But for me, as a Muslim for 15 years, zakat was something that if I didn't do, I'd be punished by Allah if I had the minimum nisab and I held it for 1 year and whatever all the conditions were met. But to me, it was a private charity, and of course you're supposed to give even more than 2.5%. But again, it's all about interpretation, right?
Yeah, but Erin is saying, and so she's saying that zakat is. Zakat. It's two comments below that. Erin is saying that zakat is a tax, so it's not just a charity; it's also a tax. So how is a tax not political? Is the question. That's what Umema and Erin. If
it's implemented as a tax, a holding tax, then yes, you could say it would be a political thing, just like chopping off the hands. But to many Muslims, I know I'm going to get Amin mad at me for saying this, zakat is it's a donation. You make it. If you don't make it, Allah will be angry at you. If you make it, then you're doing a good deed, just like giving in charity, or just like.
You don't understand my problems with this. I completely acknowledge the other interpretations that people have. I'm not saying they're more right. In fact, they're less literal and all that. But I acknowledge their existence. I always acknowledge their existence.
Yeah.
But my problem with zakat is actually okay. So here's the thing. In fact, my problem is with zakat is the interpretations that are good.
Why is that a problem?
So the interpretations that are bad, for example, in Iran, zakat and khums zakat is actually a huge problem. You take the people's money and you hold it for imams, for the Mahdi, and it's actually a political tool for people to actually hoard a lot of money and invest it, and they become like their own mutual funds and hedge funds.
Oh, interesting.
So but that's actually better for me than the one that you said, that the ones that is actually good and it's actually taking care of the poor. That's the problematic part, okay?
But what if it is good? What if it actually benefits society?
The better it is, the bigger a problem it is.
No, but okay? Just because it's religion, it's bad. Like why?
Why is it worse? The better it is?
You guys, actually, here's a more innocent part of Islam that is even bigger problem. Okay, so like the zakat, you could have good interpretations and bad interpretations, but here's a part of Islam that I can't think of a bad interpretation. Islam and Muhammad has been very obsessed with taking care of orphans. Okay, very obsessed.
Yeah,
this is something that Muhammad didn't change his views on. Mecca and Medina consistently take care of the orphans. One of the purest parts of Islam that you can't come up with a very bad interpretation of it. This is one of the most problematic parts of Islam. Okay,
why?
And the reason, because it's the sugar coating for swallowing the poison pill, right? It's the
the overall point, yeah.
It is the sugar coating for making you swallow. This is the PR front of a very problematic belief system. The PR front, the thing that hides all the shit that comes behind it. Right? I mean, the example I give is like, imagine how much of a bigger of a problem Nazism would have been, okay, if Hitler had some sense to know that for PR. For example, imagine Hitler went went out and had pictures of him taking like food and going out to orphans and feeding orphans, right? And you had so many pictures of that, and you had documentaries of that. I'm so glad that Hitler never did that. I'm so glad, because like, imagine he did all the horrible things he did, like he gassed Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and all the handicapped people, and he killed a whole bunch of other people. But on top of all the genocide and the crimes that he committed, he also went out and hey, look, take care of orphans and feed them. Let's take some picture, PR stuff. I'm so glad that he didn't do that, because that would be a sugarcoating for a genocidal worldview. Okay,
so we got the point. But is there anything? So I get that whole idea about the sugarcoating,
right.
But zakat inherently, just on its own, do you think that's a bad thing? It's a problematic thing.
Yeah, it's a bad thing because it's also by itself it's also a bad thing, because it makes it. Religion as a whole has done a very good job to make it seem like it's the source of morality. It's the source of charity. And it's
just the act, Armin. That I get. That's also part of the.
It doesn't do anything, because we have seen time and time and again that with or without religion, people are the same. Charitable. The same.
Charity. Everybody gives charity. Yeah. So
everybody gives charity. So it's not doing anything.
Okay. Let's go to. Sorry, Abdullah, you had to say something really quick.
I was just saying,
it's not doing anything other than taking credit for people's charity for a horrible.
No, we got that, Armin. Yeah, Abdullah.
I was just saying.
Sorry, I didn't mean that in a rude way. I actually think that's a good point, but we got it.
I think it depends on how you look at religion in general, and if you look at religion as this evil virus that's, corrupt and yes, then you would see it that way. Some other people, for example Jonathan Haidt, sees religion as not a mind virus, but something that was beneficial to humanity in the past. Maybe it's not beneficial anymore, but it actually complemented human societies and made them more generous, and especially inside your group, right? Inside your super tribe, your religious tribe, people are more generous, people are more honest, and he mentions among Jews, right? Like there's more honesty and trust, and so if you look at religion from that perspective, then maybe it's not a bad thing. But I mean, if you look at religion as it's all bad and this is just a sugarcoating, yeah, from that perspective, I see where you're coming from.
Sugarcoating,
I don't know.
It's not all bad. It's like if an ideology was 100% evil, it wouldn't survive 2 years.
Course. No, but it would, because that's what jihad and apostasy law and all of that, I think, is a bigger part of why Islam grew, not because of the nice things in Islam. I think it's because of the state.
To have some nice things.
But that's why it survives today.
Sure.
I think what he's saying is it's like what Hamas does, right? Like when Hamas, they win elections because they provide a great hospital system, provide amazing social services.
I wish Islam was 100% evil, because it wouldn't have because it wouldn't have lasted this long.
No, I see that point. I completely disagree with Jonathan Haidt. I like Jonathan Haidt, but I think he's vastly overrated. I don't know. He's a big rock star right now. That's only because Hitchens is dead. So 1055, Matt Rose is saying, could the one true Islam have died off when the Prophet Muhammad died? This is something I heard Tariq Fatah say to me like 10 years ago. He's like, Islam died the day Muhammad died. That's what he said.
Good impression.
He's like, you jihadi. That's what he said 2 years later to me.
Well, technically, based on my definition of Islam wasn't even created until a couple of years after Muhammad's death.
But that's actually historically accurate.
Yeah. So the true Islam didn't exist during Muhammad's time, based on my definition of Islam.
What do you think, Abdullah? Do you think it's possible? The one true Islam died?
I think we've kind of discussed this to death, and I don't see it as one true Islam. I see there's many Islam.
But we didn't discuss the fact that Muhammad himself, during his life, there was no.
I agree with Amin. I don't think there was even Islam until after Muhammad died. Well, I mean, there was something, but it's changed. It's continually changing and being. Religion is not just one thing, and Islam is not just one thing. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Many things are evolving, but there's still this. Just like, for example, science keeps changing, but there's such a thing as science, and there are things that are outside.
I have a different view of this whole religion evolving. Like religion overall is a broader term in terms of the way people practice it, but that's a different discussion. But how many more questions, Abdullah, based on your time? One or two?
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Okay, so let's do 2 more questions. This one's a good one. Aaron Jones, 1101, Armin. Okay, so she's saying, if there is a God that sent his message and made us all, would he not expect that we would interpret things differently and judge believers by their loyalty to their interpretation? If there is a God that sent his message.
Depends on the God. Depends on how, because there's no inherent, like the characteristics that you have for a God. Like a lot of people, like Aaron, when you refer to wouldn't a God do something like this? Well, that's your understanding of a God based on how Christianity and Islam define God for you to be supposed to be. But gods could be assholes if like there's nothing inherent within the definition of a God that he has to be kind or even intelligent. Definition of a God is a conscious creator of the universe. It could be a sadistic God that is just like, maybe at the end of the anyways, like I'm not gonna
I think Aaron, like one of the problems is like when we get into this discussion of if there is a God and we ascribe some sort of reason to it, then he would have done this, and by that logic,
reason is not enough. You have to assume reason and also kindness and many other.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I'm getting at. So you would not only ascribe that, but you'd also ascribe creativity beyond anything any of us have, intelligence beyond anything that any of us have, benevolence beyond anything, evil, all of those things would be like a sort of it would be all of those things. So if that happens, then I don't think he'd really send that kind of message. I don't think he'd be sending books with messengers. I think he'd be kind of communicating more directly if he wanted to communicate.
Show up.
And then, he would show up. He would kind of like maybe help us out with the cure for COVID, or maybe if he doesn't think that that's a really important thing.
He wouldn't even create COVID. What are you talking about? If the characteristics of what Christians and Muslims and Jews want from God, like you're like, wouldn't God do this? None of the world wouldn't even be like this if God was.
And I don't think he judged like in terms of the interpretation. I think it'd be a lot clearer. So you can take that logic as far back as you want to. So
he wouldn't even test us. Here's what a kind of God would be. Like, I'm going to make infinite consciousness all around the world and give no test. There's no infinite happiness for all of you. Zero pain, zero hunger, happiness all around. Everybody is kind, no disease. Like, none of this would happen. Anyways, go on.
But then we wouldn't know what happiness is. Okay. Anyway, let's go on. Now we're getting a little too into the weeds. Okay. Fine. Okay. Last question. Is I had my eye on this. Where did it go? It's from Amema. Well, basically, what she was saying was about the hadith. That she said that why are we kind of having this conversation without including the hadith in it? Yeah. Well, not that one.
Yeah, because it's a Quranist discussion, right? That was a question.
Yeah, okay, 1106, Armin. Omema is saying, why is this whole conversation coming from a Quranist perspective? The majority of Muslims do include hadith in their beliefs. Did I miss that part of the conversation? So I think that we kind of talked about this very recently, that every sect has a different hadith source. They don't believe each other's hadith, so it's actually not something that all Muslims have in common. In fact, that's one thing that actually is responsible for a lot of the sectarianism, is that they all have different sources of hadith. And hadith, they're not considered to be, I know that Salafis consider them to be equivalent to the Quran in a lot of ways, but for everybody else, they're not that way.
They're not infallible. Yeah, I think I kind of want to answer this because I feel like maybe people might have misunderstood that I was coming from a Quranist perspective, or I was trying to say we should only look at the Quran and not the Hadith. What I was trying to say was that the Hadith definitely, to Sunni Muslims, even Shia, but give a lot of context to the meaning of the Quran and how to understand it and how to apply it. But even then, it's cherry picking, right? You're cherry picking the Hadith that the scholar. I'm hearing myself again for some reason. The scholars are cherry picking the hadith that will be preserved. So even that is a big thing. People don't realize that it's not just cherry picking hadith. Even the hadith themselves are already cherry picked because they didn't preserve a lot of hadith, right? A lot of the hadith, so Shias will accuse Sunnis of Shias accuse Bukhari of making hadith to favor Abu Bakr, Uthman, right? Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman, and they say,
which he totally did.
Yeah,
Oh my God,
and
yeah,
they
he
say
so
that,
did
and
that.
Aisha, exactly, Aisha as well, right? And they say, to put Ali's position down, but without, I'm not saying we should take a Quranist perspective. No, because I'm saying that the hadith is part of it as well. The point I was trying to make was not that. The point I was trying to make was, it's a very human process from collecting the hadith, from interpreting the hadith, from deciding whether, and we didn't even talk about that. I wanted to talk about that too. Jonathan Brown mentions this in his hadith, in his book, Misquoting Muhammad. The whole process of like, does hadith cancel Quran? To Sunnis, they got to the point where they said hadith and Quran go together, and the hadith can never contradict the Quran. So you because the hadith is explaining the Quran. But then you had other people that said, no, the hadith can never abrogate the Quran. The Quran comes first. But most Sunnis don't look at it like that. They see the hadith as explaining the Quran. So the hadith never contradicts the Quran, no matter what. Right? So this whole process of, how to kind of reconcile these things, the fiqh or sunnah, the usul al-fiqh, I meant, the process of how fiqh is derived, the process of how Islamic beliefs are made. This whole thing is a human effort. That's all I was saying. I wasn't saying only look at the Quran.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, because we focus on the Quran because that's what unites them. Hadith divides them. The Quran unites all Muslims, including fringe groups like Quran.
But even, let me just give one example that totally different. Abasa wa tawalla. I always understood this story of Surah Abasa as Muhammad turned away from the blind man and he was annoyed and he frowned. Shias interpret this Quranic verse totally differently. And I was shocked about that. They say this Quran is talking about one of the kuffar. He turned away from Muhammad and he frowned. Can you imagine that same ayah is totally different? The two interpretations are completely opposite.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples
based on the hadith.
There's a lot of examples like that. Yeah.
And Aaron Jones is saying, I never heard someone say the hadith could be fallible. The hadith very much so are known to be fallible, which is why you have Sahih and you have, Hassan and you have Da'if.
There's a lot of people now that even say Sahih hadith is fallible. Okay, so even Sahih hadith, if he has only one chain of narration, then that's fallible. And even the ones with multiple, now there's, this is a new thing I've seen growing more and more. And this is because more Muslims are actually reading the hadith and they're having that what the fuck moment, and like what the right? And they're trying to respond to that. And I've seen even more Islamic content creators coming up with saying like, okay, even if something has multiple chains of narration, if you have to first use the Quran, after that use logic, and then you trust the hadith, right?
Well, a good example is the whole Aisha age thing. Aisha's age is in Bukhari, it's Sahih.
Multiple times.
Yeah, there's a way of getting out of her being nine.
No, that's not one of the examples. That's not one of the examples, because the way they get the 18 is like, I've seen those conversations like, oh, people just remove the 10 from the 8. What the fuck?
No.
I've seen that. Another thing is that they calculate multiple, so they're ignoring the hadith that says like she's like she was 9, right? And they're ignoring that, and they're focusing on the ones that they have to add to subtract, even though you have multiple places that tells you the age exactly. So I've seen those. They're all ridiculous. But that's not even what they're like. That's not even what I'm referring to. Like they're referring, for example, I've seen Sunni scholars coming out and like referring to the hadith where they stoned the monkey.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That's Sahih, isn't it? That's Sahih.
Yeah, but that one's not. That's a good example, because that one is not really a hadith. It doesn't go back to Muhammad. It doesn't go back to Muhammad. It goes back to the companions only. And yeah, that one is Bukhari. Yet that one's criticized because it's so stupid.
But it's still Sahih, right?
Yeah, it's still Sahih. It is Sahih Bukhari. It's
so
inside
the story is, people will find this entertaining. The story is that, actually, do you want to tell the story? You're a better storyteller.
Me? Yeah, it's basically the one of the companions said at the
stoning the monkeys.
Yeah, at the time of the pre-Islamic days of ignorance, there was a monkey who did zina.
The two monkeys had sex with each other, and they weren't married.
Yeah.
Right. and the other monkeys stoned the monkeys because they had adultery, right?
Yeah.
And I heard like Islamic preachers coming as very famous Islamic preachers, and saying like, why, like, are you guys idiots? Animals don't marry each other. There's no such thing as adult zina in animals. Do you really believe that monkeys will actually stone another monkey? Like, the whole concept of marriage is between humans and blah blah blah. And they were criticizing authentic Sahih hadith, and they're like saying this is one of the examples why you take logic before you accept Sahih. And they're like, the only thing we accept is the Quran. I'm like, wow, like honestly, this is new for me. This type of reaction to the hadith.
This is new.
It is new.
It is new. This is new, and it's happening. And when people say Islam can't be reformed, okay, now I'm going to open a big can of worms. It is being reformed right there. That's a good example. This is a perfect example of Islam being reformed, according to me.
Well, yeah, okay. I didn't say Islam can't be reformed. I said Islam shouldn't be reformed.
All right. So I
that's
think
another discussion. I think it's dangerous that Islam should die rather than reform.
Erin is saying that she was told that the hadith were infallible, and I think that it may have been because amongst Salafis, right. And I remember I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I saw that one of the big things that we were told is they believe that the hadith are equivalent to the Quran, and I'm not even joking, equivalent in terms of authenticity.
Oh yes,
so Salafis do. Yeah. So a lot of Saudis believe this. Now Yasmin Mohammed, who was also
But they say the Sahih hadith, not all hadith. They say the Sahih hadith.
There's unique ones for this. You have different grades of authenticity.
Bukhari and even among all the Sahih hadiths, they're mostly referring to Bukhari and Muslim.
And there's enough like batshit crazy stuff in there to discredit. I mean, sorry for lack of better terms. But in any case, that was fun. So that was good. We ended up, I think, agreeing on more than we disagreed on. So.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of not surprised because I feel like we've all interacted in this space for so long and we've thought about these arguments. So I'm glad. I thought there was more disagreement based on Armin freaking out in the other video, but I think we actually agree on almost everything, to be honest. Like
well, I knew that we agree on the concepts, but the fact that we disagree on the semantics, to me, is an important thing. Because I think changing definitions, because this is a trickery change that I've been used with God. I have a lot of experience with people trying to, like, instead of having a discussions with me on whether God is real or not, they're just trying to discuss switch the definitions, like just pulling the carpet from beneath you. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. This is what I mean when I'm talking about Islam, and I'm against Islam based on this definition of Islam. And you're not going to just distract me by all of a sudden talking about something else. So I just want to make sure that we keep the definitions where they are. And if you want to create a new thing, just name it something else. I'm keeping this definition because we built it like it's kind of like you're having a flag and you're trying to unite everybody, an army under it, and you're just stealing my flag away. And I'm not going to let you steal my flag. I'm raising an army using that flag.
Such a nationalist, Armin. You are. Okay. Anyway, I've really enjoyed this 3-way oral intercourse that we engaged in over the last couple hours. That was a lot of fun, and I hope Abdullah to come back and let's talk about the Muslim thing. I enjoy this. This is a lot of fun.
This is fun.
This was fast moving, and it was great. The time just flew by. I know I said I wanted to go much earlier than that, but I didn't even realize the time was like boom, zooming.
Yeah, you have fun with that. You should come here more often.
Samir, you know something? I knew that would happen. I knew. So anyway, that's great, everybody. Good luck. If you want to
everybody
know,
in live chat.
So watch out for 2 more episodes with Abdullah. One is going to be on what the definition of a Muslim is, and the third one is going to be him giving us tips on how to do your own haircut when you're in quarantine, or quarantine, as we say. We skip one of the A's in quarantine. So thank you, all of you, Susanna, Armin. I'm reading off the chat, and Armin just commented. Okay, Aaron, Mars, Darko, Matt. Omema, of course. Tani.
We should have Omema back at some point.
Yeah, Mars Chung, Mike, and everybody else. You know who you are. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, if you guys want to be part of the conversation live, and Tony as well. If you guys want to be part of the conversation and ask questions to us and our guests while these live streams are going on, please consider becoming a patron, especially because we lost a lot of our patrons because of this whole COVID stuff. So if you are not financially suffering or like you're not struggling, please consider joining. Link is in the description, becoming a patron. But do not support us financially. Again, I don't even know why would you even think that. If you're struggling financially, do not support us. Don't even think about it. Don't even dare try to support us financially. You could support us in other way. You could share the videos. You could share our podcast. Support us that way. But if you are not struggling financially, please consider replacing some of the patrons that we lost. Link is in the description.
And send us all your zakat money. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Okay, Abdullah, stay on for just a second. Okay, bye-bye, everybody. We're going to see you next time. By the way, remember, we're having our end of a month Q&A coming up soon at the end of the month. So we're going to do that, and you'll get a notification.
That will be public.
Okay, and that's going to be public for everybody. So invite your friends, too. If you know anybody's interested, get them to tune in. It'll be awesome. You can ask us anything. You can get relationship advice, whatever the hell you want.
Islam, it could be about shows.
Remember when I talked about how my penis went numb when I was doing that Quran reading thing? Like that. So those really good stories.
The video got flagged. Bye. I'm going to end this.
Scientific term. Bye, everybody.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.